hang on, before we start, I could.
Yeah. I've also got something to show off. So,
hello and welcome back to the channel. Big episode today. Big episode. Sam's back.
I am back. I'm glad to be back with an audience. Hello.
Yeah, hopefully a bigger audience than last time.
Yeah. Hopefully I won't send them all running.
We've gained quite a lot of subscribers of late. I was at 75 about a week and a half ago, and now, as of recording, we're on 99. So,
and I very confidently said, "You'll have 100 by the end of the year." I'm calling it now.
Yeah, one video
passes.
Yeah,
can you imagine video. If we wait the rest of the year for one more? That would be really.
Don't say that. One video changes everything in the YouTube world. So, yeah, thanks to all the new subscribers, and I'm sure a lot of you will be excited to hear about the band that we're covering today.
Yeah,
with a little twist, because Sam, I don't want to say he's going in blind, because I feel like everyone is born knowing at least 20 Beatles songs. So he's going in blind album-wise.
Yeah. Never heard an album in full until doing the dive. So exciting stuff.
Yeah, I guess before we start, I'll give a brief history of my experience with the Beatles. As with a lot of people, they were one of the first classic bands of the 60s and 70s that I got into. And, you know, I think for a lot of people, they are a gateway music-wise into more, because they sort of are very much grounded in pop, but especially in the later years, they start to experiment a little bit, and they were very influential to a lot of different genres, not just into the pop genre. So I think they're a really good gateway band because they're quite accessible whilst also being able to do something a bit out there and a bit weird, which I'm sure we'll get to a couple tracks. Which,
maybe we won't. Maybe we'll never get around to it.
No, maybe this intro will just take 10 years.
Yeah, but we Beatles deep dive out. We didn't finish. Sorry.
So yeah, I mean, I've loved the Beatles for 5 or 6 years now. They're either my favorite band or my second favorite band, depending. With Radiohead, those two are always the ones that are. So I'm glad. I bet Sam is glad we're doing the Beatles and not Radiohead, no matter what he's doing for the Beatles. Yeah.
Trey took that hit for me, so I don't have to worry about doing Radiohead.
Yeah. So, and also, fun little story. I lent Sam my CD of Rubber Soul, if I recall. So that was me being like, "Hey, you might like this one." I'm interested in particular where that one lands, but I
hold all the cards.
We have 13 albums to rank.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just get right into it, because this is the longest discography we've done since Depeche Mode. It's one less than Depeche Mode, one less album. And what's remarkable about it is that these 13 albums were released in a 7-year span, which is...
They really pumped them out. I mean, Depeche Mode took like 36 years to do one more than them. So, you know, no, they were machines.
So I guess that will be definitely something that's discussed as well, the output, because I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of these albums, and I suspect Sam and I might have quite different lists, but we'll see. I'm very, very interested, so let's get into it. I'll start, because Sam is the mystery man,
the magical mystery man.
Exactly. My number 13, probably not a big surprise to anyone. I feel like it's most people's number 13. It's Yellow Submarine. No surprise to Sam. I have been very clear about my opinions on this album. You know what? It's not the worst thing in the world. I just don't think it should count. It's my because if we're looking at it seriously, there are 4 original Beatles songs on this album. There are 2 songs that are on other Beatles albums, and then the second half is orchestral stuff done by George Martin, the producer, that was the score of the film of the same name. So I guess all I can really talk about is the 4 original Beatles songs. I don't really like Only a Northern Song. It's definitely the Beatles. It's George Harrison getting very weird. And it's one of the few Beatles songs where there are a couple where I'm just like, okay, hold on, this is hard. This is barely music. Like, I know you're trying to do interesting things, but I don't get along with that song at all. Altogether now, you'll notice this, I think my favorite member has slowly become Paul McCartney. And Altogether now is very much the typical granny music, as John Lennon would call it, that Paul McCartney would put out, and it's one of his worst ones. I think it's a bit sort of it's a bit cheesy and crap. However, this album does have two really good songs for me. I really like Hey Bulldog, great bass line on that song. It's kind of a diamond in the rough. It's a really good rocker, and It's All Too Much is interesting. It's not really cool, or it's not one that I'd rush to listen to, but as a song, I find it quite interesting. And you know, as mentioned, Yellow Submarine and All You Need Is Love are both appearing on better albums, so I don't know why I guess I'll talk about them later.
Yeah, it's not worth talking about them here. It's just like, hey, remember these songs? They did well. Let's put them out again.
So yeah, and then the orchestration, I quite like film scores, but even me, I was just like, it felt kind of pointless. It's, you know, it's nice, but background music really for me. So I'm going with a generous 5 out of 10 for Yellow Submarine.
Yeah.
And I think we can just move on.
yeah, we really can, because identical. Yellow Submarine at number 13, and it's a 5. When we go through the songs, like we add the songs to a playlist, and I added one song because the other ones that were good are already in the playlist, so it just seemed a bit redundant. The one song I did add, the unique song from this album, was Hey Bulldog. That right in the playlist. So it's just a little blip in my playlist. It's like, oh yeah, look, Yellow Submarine, there it goes. As quickly as it came, it went. If only that were the case when I was listening to it. It was you got to Yellow Submarine before I did, so I heard a lot about what you were thinking. Just like unable to hold it back. And when I got there, I was just like, he is very right. This is it's a filler album. It's not, you know, I don't think it does the Beatles justice, because after that, each album has something of like quite a bit of value from here on in. It's just Yellow Submarine. I think you're right. It shouldn't count. It's like, it's just unnecessary. It's like filler.
To me, it's basically a ploy to make money off the film that came out.
And the fact that it's just really popular songs that have already been on albums or on it, it's like, just cut the middleman and do a greatest hits. It's like, this is unnecessary. So we can agree there. We synced up perfectly.
I'm glad we agree on Hey Bulldog though, because that's considered by a lot of people one of the underrated. There's no underrated Beatles songs. Come on, it's the Beatles.
No, they've all got Wikipedia pages. Every single song they've ever put out. It's like, that's not underrated.
But it is a really good song, and I'm glad you pointed that one out. My number 12. We're sticking in 5 land, actually, only for one more album. It's the other one where I've always been a bit meh on it, and it is the second album with the Beatles, which, I like. I think this is a really front-loaded album, is my main issue. I really like a lot of the songs on the first side. It won't be long. Yeah, it's really good. All I've Got to Do is really, really sweet as well. All My Loving is usually the song that people harp on about from this album, and rightly so. Great song. Don't Bother Me is a George Harrison track, and oftentimes the George Harrison tracks are really nice shifts from the Lennon and McCartney stuff, especially on these early albums. And I do like Till There Was You, a nice little slice of, again, granny music.
I love that phrase.
Yeah.
Because I can immediately visualize which songs he's talking about.
Yeah. So, but then there is a lot of crap on this album as well. Little Child is just one of the worst songs they ever did. It's just, I don't really get what it like. And there's also like 4 covers on this album that are really classic 60s songs, and I just think there are better versions of all of them. Please Mr. Postman is probably the best of these, but I think there are better versions by Motown groups. Roll Over Beethoven, the Chuck Berry cover, is fine. I'd rather listen to the original. Money, closing the album on Money was very interesting, because it's like, you close the album and the message you're left with is money, that's what I want. And it's like, I wonder what they were thinking about when they were making this album.
Thinking it's the money.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think they do You Really Got a Hold on Me quite well as well, but again, it's not the best version of that song. I did forget Devil in Our Heart, another good one. But I think this is a slight step down from the debut. A lot of these early Beatles albums kind of get lost in having way too many covers, and the original Beatles songs are always the best ones, I find, apart from Little Child. Little Child sucks. But anyway, with the Beatles is my number 12, still at 5.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, like I said, from here, I'm already like, yeah, Beatles great, right? So like, don't hold things like it. Don't penalize me too hard for me putting this album at number 12, right? Because I'm at a 7.
Wow!
So,
Wow!
Yeah, I'm at a 7.
Wow!
But you're gonna judge me because it's Let It Be.
Interesting.
Let It Be is at number 12, but it's a 7. I enjoyed this album. It's just after all that's come before it, it's quite late in the discography. So by this point, I'd heard a lot of the Beatles, and I was thinking, is it as good as this? And it just slowly worked its way down. There's a lot of 7s here, so it's under some really stiff competition, and so unfortunately, it's down at number 12. But there are some absolutely banging tracks on it. I mean, the titular one, That's Good, Across the Universe, that's another banger. I did really enjoy this album, and it feels like sacrilege to put that album at the bottom, because I think that's what they were recording when they did Get Back, wasn't it? The recent documentary that's come out of that footage is from them creating this album, and so it's very like of the moment right now. But I just, compared to what they had already done, and obviously there's some albums that come after it that are, well, one. It's coming under close scrutiny. Because they produce such great music, something is going to be near the bottom of the list, even if it's a bad discography like it is. So yeah, Let It Be at number 12.
Wow, you're making me very, very happy, Sam. That's good.
Oh, good. I thought you'd like hate me for putting it that low, but I don't know where it is on your list yet, so we'll see.
Yeah. Well, you're reaching 7 a lot quicker than I am, so that's interesting. We'll see where I have that album.
We will, hopefully.
My number 11, I'm going to keep hitting up the early albums, because my number 11 is the debut, Please Please Me, which I think is probably the worst sounding Beatles album. There's a legend that they recorded this album in a day, and you can kind of tell, as much as the songs are really, really good, the recording of some of them is not great for me, especially, I think all of the albums except Let It Be were produced by George Martin, and man, he got a great sound out of those instruments and their voices, and the songs just sound as good as they possibly could thanks to him. And this is the one exception, I think, because what does carry it a bit higher, despite me not liking the sound, I Saw Her Standing There is a brilliant track. I love Misery, it's really sweet. Anna is a bit of a fan favorite. I've never really got that one, but it got a bit better on this listen for me. There's a lot of really cheesy songs like Chains and Boys. I'm talking about Boys, like this is just a strange song.
They run along with a very similar sound with most of their
and then I think Ask Me Why is a bit mid as well. The title track is okay, and then you get some more really good ones like Love to Do, which I think is just a really sweet song, and Do You Want to Know a Secret is really nice as well. And then I think it closes on the best song on the album, which is Twist and Shout. Just an incredible vocal from John Lennon there, where he'd almost lost his voice and he's sort of like screaming, but he can't. I don't know. There's something about the sort of the grit and edge for 1963 on that song just feels really impactful when you hear it. So yeah.
Really easy to forget what era you're listening to when you're listening to the Beatles. It's quite hard to like compare them to their contemporaries. They were doing something different.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what drags these earlier ones down, because I get so excited about later stuff that this feels quite twee in comparison. So I'm at 6.
They're still like the rest of them, really.
I'm at 6 for Please Please Me. It's got some amazing hits, but there's a lot of filler that I don't really care for. So that's my number 11.
Cool. We very nearly synced up, because my number 11 is with the Beatles. We're going back now. I mean, these last two have been later in the discography. We're going early on. You're definitely right. Totally front-loaded. I did struggle to find how they could make half an hour seem so long, because we had some great hits at the start. All My Loving what a way to open an album. And you ride that high for a little while, and eventually you're like, when's the next good one coming?
Yeah.
Well, okay, at least, oh well, okay, this isn't great, but at least it's only 2 minutes, and then it just carries on like that, and then it ends. So yeah, it didn't deserve to be very, very high. And I knew when I heard that, even though it was early on in the discography, it wasn't going to be one that was going to be anywhere near the top. I just knew that they could do better. I mean, obviously, I haven't put Please Please Me yet in the list, so you can tell I'd already kind of thought, right, that's good, and then moved on to this, and it's like, didn't seem right. It definitely didn't seem very Beatles to me overall. No. Yeah. It averages out to being a bit not insignificant, but obviously there are some songs on here that are definitely not insignificant. But that just shows how much, again, it's that word filler again. I feel as though it just trim the fat of an album that's already only half an hour.
Well, that's the thing, is that a couple of points there is, we talk about filler, but the Beatles, when they started, the album wasn't really a thing that was like, the singles were still outselling albums. And that wasn't until 1965 that albums became something that people cared about. Because otherwise people would just buy albums because, oh, I like that single, let's have the album. And, it was the Beatles, along with the Beach Boys and Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones, that really kicked off, and the Kinks, to a lesser extent, that kicked off the album era starting in 1965. So that's why some of these early ones maybe fall a bit lower, because they're a product of their time, and it's before the Beatles really started pushing the envelope a little bit. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention is, I love what you said, that it doesn't feel like the Beatles, because there are so many covers, and it just feels like any 60s pop group. It doesn't really feel like a unique album, which they have a few of them. My number 10, that's what we're on, right? 10. And this is the only album where I'm not sure on my rating, and I'm going to decide after I talk about it. So it's on the borderline of a 6 and a 7. And my number 10 is Beatles for Sale. So we're going to keep going on the early albums. And this is the biggest example, really, of the covers versus the originals. Because the originals, No Reply, I'm a Loser, 8 Days a Week, What You're Doing, I'll Follow the Sun. Oh God, that's just amazing music, like so good.
Yeah.
Especially What You're Doing, I think, is a really underrated early beat. Oh, I just said that word again. It's really
they're all rated, okay?
It's less talked about as an early Beatles song, I would say. Love the 12-string guitar on that one. 8 Days a Week, obviously, is just classic. And I love how, I don't know, we talked about their output, and I think these early albums, they were really feeling the burn of having to tour around the world and release 2 albums a year and non-album singles as well. And this is the album where a lot of people consider it their burnout album, because there are so many covers, and the songwriting is a lot more negative, which is interesting. You got songs like No Reply and I'm a Loser, which now it doesn't seem like much of a deal, but those early first 3 albums, a lot of the songs are very, oh yeah, happy. And this is the first album where it's a bit like there's a bit more introspection going on.
The shift begins.
Yeah, and it's definitely deserves some credit for that. Honey Don't is all right, but the Rock on George One More Time is
Ringo.
It's just great. And yeah, Every Little Thing is nice. I Don't Want to Spoil the Party is pretty good. I don't really like Kansas City or Mr. Moonlight or Rock and Roll Music. Or there's a few covers that I'm not that keen on, but they were really starting to find their sound on this album. And is it a 6 or a 7? I'm going to stick with a 6. I'm going to go with my gut, and I don't want to overrate them. You know what I mean? I'm going to stick with that, and I think that's a fair score, even though it does have some high highs. But the scores are going to go up very quickly after that. I think 9 upwards is where you really get to the best of the best for me.
Right. Okay, get ready. Number 10's Rubber Soul. Okay.
Wow.
I'm
Wow. Crazy.
Are you surprised?
No, I am surprised, because I assumed that Rubber Soul and Let It Be would be home run Sam albums, because they're a bit less weird. But I suppose you've gravitated towards the more experimental stuff, which is exciting. I'm kind of happy about that. So
yeah, it's Rubber Soul. It wasn't. I felt as though it was kind of just following the precedent, and some of John Lennon's voice is so dreary on this album. He's a nowhere man.
Yeah,
I just found him insufferable on this album. But there are some good tracks. If I refresh my memory one moment, yeah, Norwegian Wood is a good song. It's a solid one. I enjoyed Michelle. And that's pretty much it. And when it comes to the really significant ones, everything else was kind of dreary. I've got some others on there, but they weren't big sort of standout songs for me. I feel as though that album didn't really, just like with these other ones, it's coming up against stiff competition, and they proved they could do better, and it just seemed a bit shabby.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be talking about that one for a while, but I do see
No.
That is probably the most John Lennon centric Beatles album. I think most of the big songs like In My Life and Norwegian Wood and Nowhere Man are all John Lennon, and Girl. I imagine you didn't like Girl very much, and it
wasn't too bad, not the worst. It got in my playlist, so.
And then also that has one of the most controversial Beatles tracks in Run for Your Life, which I guess we'll get to when I talk about the album. But yeah, my number 9. I don't think you needed to apologize that much, because my number 9 is Let It Be. In terms of release order, the final album, but in terms of recording order, which is how we decided to listen to them, it is the second to last. And I think there's a good reason, because Abbey Road is the better way to send them off, in my opinion, anyway. And yeah, I mean, this doesn't lack good tracks. I mean, Two of Us is a really nice way to open. It's kind of like a wholesome, you hear about all the bitterness between Lennon and McCartney, and that is sort of like them two singing together about a song about a road trip. And it's just like, look at them getting on, and it's like,
everything's fine.
Yeah, I like that song for that reason. I used to really love Dig a Pony, but now it doesn't hit me as good. And you mentioned the big songs, Across the Universe and Let It Be and Get Back, all great. I've Got a Feeling, I think, is a really good deep cut on this. I Mean Mine is cool. But again, this kind of falls into having, I think they've really managed to master having a solid track list by this point. And this album just feels a bit muddled. I think The Long and Winding Road is nice, but Phil Spector comes in to produce this album and he really overdoes it with the strings. It's almost like a Disney song. It's and also because the original recordings, you can tell they were like sort of pseudo live recordings, so they sound quite rough. So if you're going to go with that, go for like a live feel album, not just have a live feel and then just chuck a string section on it. It just doesn't make any sense. So it does feel a bit misguided in that sense. One After 909 I don't like, or For You Blue, just not very good. But it has some of their best moments, their finest songs. The sound, I think George Martin was a much better producer. He got a much better sound out of them than Phil Spector did. And yeah, it's a 7. And I'll tell you right now, it's my only 7. I'm going up to 8s from on up, which is
up to 8 from 8.
Yeah, which is for me, quite something, because to me an 8 is a great album, and there's a lot of great albums from the Beatles. So Let It Be landed at number 9 for me. I think it's good, but I think it's sort of a divisive album, because I think a lot of people share the same issues in terms of the sound. I think it definitely doesn't feel as cohesive as some of their other albums. And the track list is weird. Like closing on Get Back, it's like, well, when it's their final album, can you close on like Let It Be or Long and Winding Road or something? I don't know. It just felt weird. And also, Don't Let Me Down was supposed to be on the album and then they didn't put it on. And I'm like, you've put One After 909 on the album and not Don't Let Me Down. Like, anyway. My negativity is going to run dry very soon. So,
all right, well, that's good. I'm glad you're flushing it through your system now. I've got a little bit of negativity coming up on the next one, but I think for the most part, it's going to be left behind here as well. Number 9 is just a shit place to be for this one. You don't want to be number 9 in the Beatles ranking, clearly.
Number 9.
My number 9.
Number 9.
We'll come to that. Okay, you're digging up trauma, but we'll come to that. Okay. My number 9 is Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
If you sat me down and told me you got 2 options, okay? You either listen to Rubber Soul or you listen to Magical Mystery Tour. I'll do Rubber Soul. However, Magical Mystery Tour is doing something different, and I think that it's a pivotal moment in history for the Beatles, and there's some absolutely banging tracks on it that absolutely hold up the album over Rubber Soul. Rubber Soul was just a bit too insignificant, and even though there's some absolutely mind-bending stuff on Magical Mystery Tour, there's still some fantastic things to take from it. Like All You Need Is Love, Hello, Goodbye, Strawberry Fields Forever. They're all bops. And so that's why it ended up getting higher on the ranking, Rubber Soul. We're still in sevens. So these are all things that are level pegging. But I just think that Magical Mystery Tour is far more significant than Rubber Soul. And I feel it. I feel it when I'm listening to it, even if sometimes it felt like torture. But yeah, it's fine. We're still at sevens. This is the last time you'll hear me being really quite negative about Beatles albums. After this, it does improve significantly, I think.
Wow, you're really repping the early stuff. I'm surprised. That's interesting.
Are you? Yeah.
Yeah. So, well,
Look
I
at me.
had a lot of the early albums already, and this is, yeah, my number 8 to give it away is A Hard Day's Night, which, of course, the soundtrack for the film of the same name. I think it's the first side that is the soundtrack, and the second side is songs they added to make a whole album out of it. Man, straight away, as soon as this album starts, you get the opening title track, and it is just easily the best song they've done up to that point. So fun, so catchy, great percussion. And it doesn't really let off after that. I Should Have Known Better is another track I think is brilliant. Great harmonica on that one. If I Fell, really sweet love song. I'm Happy Just to Dance With You is a very early George song, and he sounds very young on that song. Very innocent, which I like. And I Love Her is just so beautiful. The guitar on that is just amazing. Tell Me Why is so infectious and catchy and upbeat and just euphoric. Can't Buy Me Love is a very popular song, but it's not one of my favorites on the album, but it's still fun. I love Anytime at All, great song. And then it does peter off for the last few songs a little bit. They're still good, like I'll Cry Instead, Things We Said Today, I'll Be Back. These are good songs, but they're not at the same level as how barnstorming this album starts off. And when I say starts off, the first like 7 or 8 tracks are all just amazing. And this is what I mean. This is my 8th favorite. Like that's to make so the jump from Let It Be, which is a strong 7, to this one, which is a strong 8, A Hard Day's Night is my number 8. And I think for most bands, this would be considered one of their very best, but there's just a lot of competition.
Yeah, definitely. My number 8 is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was a pleasant surprise going into it, being rather scared of drugs. And so I was fully expecting to get nothing out of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that was far from the case. The opening track I've known forever. It's time immemorial. It's like you said, everyone grows up knowing some Beatles songs, and that was one of them. So I was like, right, at this point, it's just going to go. But it didn't. Then it came back with a little help from my friends, but absolutely banger. We got Things Are Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Her. Within You Without You was a surprisingly good, because it's very strange and not sounds that normally work in here. But I just respect it. You know, it's actually, you know, it carries it off really well. I think it's a very strong song. It's the last 7 on my list, so it's still there, but it's definitely a higher 7 than the rest of them. Given it's drugs, it's still giving something more than drugs. And even though the influence is very present, they're definitely getting something out of it. So I guess this is my pro-drugs message right here.
Well, this is the thing, is that unlike some other bands at the time, I think the Beatles were always very grounded in pop. Well, not always. 95% of the time, very grounded in pop. And so even if a song is strange and a bit more druggy, there's still nice hooks and nice melodic moments and stuff. So I'm glad you like. I'm very surprised you like Within You Without You. That was one of the songs I put down as Sam will hate that song, but I'm glad you liked it. So
It's all right. Yeah, it's all
my
right. It's all right.
my number 7, and this is the last of the what are considered the early Beatles albums, and it's "Help" is my number 7. Obviously, again, much like "Hard Day's Night," the opening title track, just a classic. Not a big fan of "The Night Before," but then you got to Hide Your Love Away, which is John Lennon kind of doing a Bob Dylan impression, which is, it works for the song. It's great. You're Gonna Lose That Girl is a great slice of 60s pop. Ticket to Ride is awesome. Great guitar riff, amazing drumming. I think Ringo kind of gets a bad rep for his drumming, and because he's usually just playing very basic drum parts. But honestly, this list of the albums, I kind of grew a new appreciation for Ringo's drumming. I think he's really solid as a rock, and he gets to show off a little bit sometimes. So yeah, that was definitely a highlight for him, and Act Naturally, one of Ringo's better vocals. Yeah. It's Only Love is another really good one. And then the one thing that drags this album down is the ending, because you got I've Just Seen a Face, classic, love it. Yesterday, classic, love it. End the album there, end it. And then Dizzy Miss Lizzy comes on and you're like,
you had it right there.
Yeah, it's like, that is to end on I've Just Seen a Face into Yesterday would have just been off the charts, and they just had to chuck a cover on the end.
Yeah, they got carried away, got too big for their britches. It was like, nah, we got one more.
But Yesterday is one of those Beatles songs where I have heard it a million times, but I will never get sick of it because it's so simple. Paul McCartney and his acoustic guitar, just showing that he had the best voice of any of the Beatles. And you could argue as a songwriter if George or John were better songwriters, but I think Paul easily had the best voice of all of them, in my opinion anyway. And that is really one of the great showcases of it. And there's a couple songs on another album that really showcase it as well, which I'm sure Sam might have an idea which album I'm talking about. But which means I kind of have the typical top 6, which you do not, which is interesting.
Do I not? Look at me outside of the vinyl community, not knowing what's normal.
An 8 for Help, by the way. I think it's a great album, and it could have been upper echelon if they just would have tweaked the track list a little bit.
Yeah. I think you got some worthwhile criticisms there, especially at Dizzy Miss Lizzy. My number 7, we're jumping up to an 8 now, my first 8 of many. It's Please Please Be, the debut. Definitely, it's a very raw album. You can kind of hear the fact that they're very early on in their careers. This is the infant Beatles, but it's probably got the most songs that I knew beforehand on it. The first ever Beatles song I ever heard was I Saw Her Standing There.
Wow.
And so that's just got an important place in my heart. And so it's like, well, okay, can you hold that? No, you can't. And so I think it's out of all the early ones, so like the first 5, which all are quite similar. That one it's strong, but it's not developed, and that's the thing. And I have this criticism with other albums like Crowded House's debut. I've said a similar thing. It just didn't feel very Crowded House, and this didn't feel very Beatles. It very much felt like this could easily be a band of the time, and it was very heavily 60s music. So what I said earlier about the great thing about the Beatles is you wouldn't know what era you're listening to. You can definitely hear it in Please Please Me, but it's got some great songs. I mean, I mentioned Saw Her Standing There, obviously that's important to me. Anna's all right, but yeah, I didn't think that much of it. Love Me Do You Want to Know a Secret is pretty class. Yeah, and that's pretty. Those are the big standout ones, the big 3, I would say, that I saw standing there. Love Me Do and Do You Want to Know a Secret. It's an 8. It's a good album. Would listen to it happily, quite a few times. It's a strong album, but it's only number 7. We're just kind of hitting the halfway point, and so you can tell the next 6 are gonna be, they're gonna have some strong praise coming.
Despite our wild well, not that wild. There's 3 albums I think that neither of us have mentioned yet, which is good. We have 3 in common in our top 6.
We could definitely still sync up. There's still time.
Yeah. But you've put Please Please Me that high. You still haven't mentioned Beatles for Sale, which I had quite low. That's fine. I'm just glad you've got so much out of it. You know, I'm very happy man.
Come back
Especially
from
after,
Elliott Smith strong.
yeah, especially after Elliott Smith. I needed this. I might have had to sack you if you'd have.
Yeah, this is
an
the
8.
breaking point
Yeah.
for our working relationship.
So my number 6, you didn't mention it that long ago. It's Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I suspect we might be in a bit of hot water with neither of us having this in the top 5, but I've always found this to be a little bit overrated. I can use that word. Because it's possibly one of their most famous albums. I mean, they have a lot of famous albums, but this is one of the ones that you hear talked about the most. And the first Beatles song I ever heard was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which is a pretty good song. I think they have much better, but
it's not bad.
and I kind of have the same sentiments as you on a lot of this. The opener and how that leads perfectly into With a Little Help from My Friends. The transition is just great. And Ringo, perhaps his finest vocal on With a Little Help from My Friends. It could only be Ringo, because it has to be this like goofy sort of like
He carries it off.
And I mean, well, I guess I'll be talking about Paul McCartney's bass work a lot on a lot of these albums, but With a Little Help from My Friends is a really good one in terms of the bass as well. I love Getting Better, apart from the verse that John has about I used to be cruel to my woman, and I'm like, are you admitting to beating your wife here? That's a bit. But anyway, regardless of that, it is a really good song. And I kind of, again, similar to Two of Us, it's kind of like a microcosm of their relationship, because Paul's singing, it's getting better all the time, and John's singing, it can't get no worse. So it's like the optimist and the pessimist in the same song. I just think that's great. There's a couple songs I don't like. Fixing a Hole, I don't really like at all. I never have. The only thing that makes it listenable is Paul's vocals. And I don't really like Within You Without You that much either. I think they did another sort of Indian music inspired song on Revolver, which I like a lot more than Within You Without You. Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite is quite fun. I love She's Leaving Home, just brilliant, just lyrics, and the arrangement from George Martin is fantastic. And When I'm 64, classic granny music. If you don't like Paul McCartney, you're probably going to hate When I'm 64. But if you do like Paul McCartney, you're probably going to love When I'm 64, because it is the most Paul McCartney song I've ever heard in my entire life.
That's very fair.
Lovely Rita, I think, is really fun as well, and Good Morning, Good Morning. And then I think it ends really strong with A Day in the Life, which is considered by many one of the Beatles' best songs. I wouldn't quite go, it might make my top 20, who knows? But I think it leaves a great taste in the mouth after a fairly disjointed album. I think it's got some great drumming from Ringo, and I love how John has got these really interesting lyrics, and then Paul comes in, it's like, woke up, got out of bed, and it's like this other thing that carries it through. And then it just feels like a very epic way of closing the album, and I think it works even better as an album closer than as a song in its own right. Another 8, it's another great album from the Beatles, and at this point in their careers, I think they were really just pumping out great stuff. And I gave Sam a selection of the non-album singles as well to listen to, and the fact that they were releasing them alongside these albums is kind of cool. I guess another thing that gets talked about with Sgt. Pepper a lot is how George Martin, the producer, sort of says his biggest regret with the Beatles was not putting Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields on Sgt. Pepper, because then he thinks if those were on this album, it would be the greatest album of all time, which is, I mean, that's fair. Those are two of the better songs on Magical Mystery Tour, and there's some songs on Sgt. Pepper that aren't as good. I think he said the songs he would have cut are When I'm 64 and Lovely Rita, which those wouldn't be the ones I would pick. So it just shows that we'll get to it with another album when people say, well, if you just change this, it'd be the perfect album. Everyone has a different opinion on that. So the album is what it is, and what it is a great album. So
Fair play. You mentioned that I haven't brought up Beatles for Sale yet. Well, that was very, poorly timed, actually, because here it is. No, I didn't hang around. There it is. Still, but we're in the 8, so you can tell that I'm ranking it pretty highly. I think there are some pretty interesting songs on there. I think the Beatles start to become the Beatles. Like here, I mean, don't get me wrong, Hard Day's Night is a great album. We're going to come to that. I haven't mentioned it yet. But Beatles for Sale, I think, is very. You identified No Reply and I'm a Loser. Great pair of songs. I'll Follow the Sun. Really enjoyed that. Honey Don't is just. Again, Ringo's songs are some of the more fun ones. It's like, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that. It's just like, hey, let's take a break for a minute here and just, rock on, George, for Ringo one time.
Yeah.
I just
Totally.
loved that song. It was really fun. It's just like, oh, I'm having a good time. It felt like I was at a club, and then the guy was just singing, and it's just like, oh, rock on, George. Yeah. I think there's he wasn't an amazing singer, but he just had this character, or at least the songs that he sang had this character that it was distinctive, and I had a lot of fun listening to it. And it's songs like that carry this album higher than the ones that have come before it. And it's a great establishing album for me. I think for you to sort of gather up Beatles sound and take that on and think, oh well, this is a good snapshot of what the Beatles are. Without having some of their juggernauts of hits. Like I don't think that there's really songs that have gone down solidly in history, in my opinion.
Yeah, the only one is 8 Days a Week, I think. Other than that, I think.
Yeah, that was not a fan of that one really. So I wouldn't say that's a hindrance to me and not a help.
Wow.
But yeah, make that what you will.
You mean not a help?
No, we'll get to that. Spoilers. But yeah, overall, I had a great time listening to this album, and I think it's a very strong one, and that's why it's got an 8.
Man, I should have done that joke of shouting the name of Help when I listed it. When I was listening.
It's too late now. I'm going to take it.
So
will it be soon or not?
My number 5, we're sticking in 1967 with Magical Mystery Tour, which was actually a pleasant surprise to me this time. It's probably the one that's moved the most since I last did a list. I probably would have had it at number 7 or number 8 last time, and now it's up to number 5. I used to share a lot of what you were saying. I think, I don't know if but this album, the reason this isn't Don't Feel Too Great, this is the other one that I don't feel too great counting as canon, is because it's an EP with singles attached to the end. So it was released initially as an EP, and then later on to sell copies, they just chucked a bunch of singles on at the end. So that is why the album comes across as a little bit backloaded, because on the back you've got Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever, Hello Goodbye, Baby You're a Rich Man, All You Need Is Love, all on the back half. And I was always of the opinion that the first half is kind of weak, which Flying and Blue Jay Way, don't really love those songs. But other than that, I pretty much like every song on the album. The title track is a great way to sort of enter you into this new drugged up psychedelic world of the Beatles. The Fool on the Hill is just classic Paul McCartney, great flute on that. Your Mother Should Know is another example of granny music. And I'm the Walrus, I think, is a really fun, it's kind of a novelty track, but I think a lot of the lyrics is kind of like an FU to people who are over analyzing John Lennon's lyrics, and he was just sort of like, you know what, I'm going to make a song that means nothing, see what they think of this. And I kind of respect,
I am the Eggman.
Yeah, I kind of respect that attitude. Yeah, I just had a great time with this, and I have to admit that the back half is much stronger. I mean, I'm not stupid. Because, yes, you mentioned it, Strawberry Fields Forever is a classic for a reason. Just hearing just about that song, all the stuff George Martin had to do, because John recorded 2 guitar parts that were in different times, and he had to slow one down and all this different stuff to make it work just as John Lennon wanted it. And it was worth it. The big strings as well. And Penny Lane for me is the masterpiece of the album. Glorious pop song, great instrumentation. There's about 4 key changes. The trumpet solo in it is just amazing. And I just think it's an instant mood lifter. And yeah, obviously Baby You're a Rich Man was used at the end of The Social Network, used very well in that film. And yeah, it's an 8. It's another 8. It's my last 8. We're getting into strong albums after this. I mean, all these eights I think are great albums, but we're getting into
we're in the top 5 now.
Yeah, so that's my number 5 is Magical Mystery Tour, even though it's not really an album.
that is strong praise for an album ranking when you're ranking a not album, in your opinion, very very highly. Right, my number 5 is definitely an album, and it's A Hard Day's Night, which it was just like a great sound that, like, I feel as though the momentum built up and it just kept going. That the opening track really did, like you said, establish what this album was going to be, and I feel like the subsequent tracks really did run with it. I also do agree with you, though, that the last parts of the album are not as strong as the rest, but overall it's a fun time to be had listening to that album. And I remember I have this vague memory of a very long time ago watching A Hard Day's Night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very vague. I just got this image of black and white on the train with Steptoe in it playing, I think it was Paul's dad, or granddad or whatever. I just have it, like, when I was young and I was getting weirdly into the Beatles, but only the big ones because I was like 9. And so I watched A Hard Day's Night and Help, and I have vague memories of watching them. I feel like I should watch them as an adult just to see.
I've never seen them, so that might be something we could do at some point, knowing that you're a fan now. So
yeah,
good.
Yeah, no, we can do that.
Yeah, so yeah, I think you really nailed it. That is probably the most fun straight through listen of all these. You know, as much as I can talk about, oh, this one changed the game and was experimental, and this one creates a certain image. That one is start to finish the most just puts a smile on your face fun album that they put out.
Yeah.
My number 4 was a bombshell you dropped early in the video by putting this at, what was it, number 10? Rubber Soul. Yeah. I obviously own this on CD. Well, Sam has my CD at the moment. He won't want it now.
I got it back. It's just you're in Wales. So
it's funny because I had a few options of which Beatles album to give you to start off with, and I picked this one. And the funniest thing is, you've ranked all my other Beatles CDs higher.
Have they all come up now on the list?
No, I think I have the White Album and I have Abbey Road, and I thought those wouldn't be the best starting points, but maybe I was wrong.
Because neither of those have come up yet.
So yeah, Rubber Soul, I think it's great. I recently talked about it on my favorite albums of 1965 video. It was my favorite. Spoiler. No, it was my second favorite. What am I saying? I was in that video. It was my list.
The curator of that video.
Yeah. So I think this is really where the last remnants of their boy band phase are all but gone. I kind of see what you mean. It's definitely a transitionary album, because I think if you went from Help to Revolver straight away, you'd be like, what happened? But Help to Rubber Soul to Revolver is a very natural progression. And I feel like you kind of don't as much have the fun of the earlier albums, but you also don't really have the experimentation that they do later on. However, pure songwriting wise, I think this is a great album. I think Drive My Car is a great rocker, loads of momentum, amazing bass line. Again, I could listen to Paul McCartney. There's a whole, neither of us have mentioned this album yet, but there's a whole YouTube video that's just Paul McCartney's isolated bass from Abbey Road. And it is just amazing, just listening to it, because he is all over the place. And if anything, this is one of the most important albums in music history, because this is the album that inspired Brian Wilson to make Pet Sounds, because he heard Rubber Soul and was like, oh shit, they're getting good. We need to... Yeah, Pet Sounds is better, but Brian Wilson was like, heard this and was like, shit, we need to... They're really good. They're better than us right now. We need to beat them. So he made Pet Sounds, and then Paul McCartney and John Lennon heard that and were like, damn, that's really good. We need to make Sgt. Pepper, which is that rivalry kind of changed music, you could say, in a lot of ways. You mentioned Norwegian Wood. I absolutely love it. Great story about that song is that Bob Dylan, obviously similarly to You Gotta Hide Your Love Away, it's very Bob Dylan with the sort of the storytelling and the sort of roughish vocal. I think the lyrics on that one are great, how it progresses. And yeah, Bob Dylan heard that song and was like, "You bastard." So on his next album, Blonde on Blonde, he made a song called Fourth Time Around, which has the same chords and has the same vocal melody. And the last line of that song is, "I didn't ask for your crutch, so don't ask for mine." So Bob Dylan basically made a diss track. And then for months afterwards, John Lennon was terrified that Bob Dylan hated him. And he was like, "Oh my God, I love Bob Dylan and he hates me." So I think that's a really funny anecdote surrounding Norwegian Wood. And Full Time Around is a great song as well, even if just for that final line, because it's so just, yeah, great. I think You Won't See Me is a wonderful little pop tune. George Harrison starts to come into his own on this album with Think for Yourself and If I Needed Someone, both really good. Nowhere Man, I think, is great. The Word is all right. Michelle, really sweet, nice. I mean, there isn't a bad song on here, really. It's just the real highlight for me is In My Life, which is my favorite song of 1965. And I think it is an absolute classic amongst classics. I think it hasn't aged a day. If someone released this today, if an indie band released this today, I'd be like, wow, yeah, that sounds like very modern. And then, yeah, the only thing I would say is that the closing track, Run for Your Life, John Lennon threatening to kill a woman if she breaks up with him is interesting. And also calling a little girl, and that he does. He does a lot of that on this album. He does a lot of weird breathing and that.
Like I said, I really don't like his vocal on this album. It just really rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of all that, I think, yeah, between Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, In My Life, Think for Yourself, Drive My Car, You Won't See Me, I love all these songs, and this album has a special place in my heart. So I'm going for a 9, maybe a slightly biased 9, but it's a 9 as my number 4 for Rubber Soul.
So my number 4, just missing the medal position, and also eliminating an opportunity for us to sync up because you haven't mentioned it yet. It's the Beatles, aka the White Album.
Oh, you know what? I am amazed. I thought this would be right near the bottom because it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. And you know what? When you have a double album, it's going to be coming under more scrutiny because you're giving more content to rank. And you know what? The first half of the album is brilliant. Really like it. I think Dear Prudence is really a very good track. I think Over Die is like really fun. I think there's a lot going on there early on in the album, and then it carries on, picks up the baton, and then the second half kind of lets it down a bit. Mainly because of Revolution 9. I hated that. And you know what? It needs to be talked about because it's 6 minutes long. No, it's longer than that. It's like 10, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh no. That pulled it down from medal position. That song, I had it written down. It's like, so no, this is pretty good. And then I was like, no. It's like, they were doing so well. It was still like, even though the second half was a little bit less memorable to me, it was still rocking. And then Revolution 9, I know that they were making a statement and it's like a sound collage and they're doing things like French words. But I did my research, you your friends, you keep your friends close, but you keep your enemies stronger. I needed to know what was going on with Revolution 9. And you know what? It's getting way too much airtime because otherwise this is a really strong album, but I just needed this to be like on record. Please do not make me listen to Revolution 9 again. Number 9.
You know what? I don't know what you think.
Okay.
I don't know what you think that people think of Revolution 9, but most people hate Revolution 9. You don't have to worry about having to defend that.
Okay.
It kind of it almost goes without saying, but we'll get to it.
I put a lot of effort into saying those.
Which means we are in top 3 territory and we share 2 of the top 3. Will we sync up?
We'll see. I don't know. My prediction is no. I think our gold medals are not going to be the same, but we'll see.
My number 3 is the album that I predict is going to be your number 1.
Right.
Which is Abbey Road.
Right.
I think, all right, I'm just going to give some context here. All of these top 3 are in my 50 favorite albums of all time. I think they are
Rightfully so.
Classics that I will take to the grave, essentially.
Leave them behind, actually. I think, like, save them for everyone else, you know.
Well, yeah, good point. Yeah.
No, I'm taking them with me.
I'll take my vinyl copies because I own all of these on vinyl. So, to me, Abbey Road is one of the 5 best sounding records of all time. The way it's produced, the way it's mixed, the way every instrument is allowed to shine. There's amazing bass lines all the way through it, mainly Come Together. I mean, come on, one of the most iconic bass lines of all time.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And Ringo gets a drum solo on the final part of the second half suite, which we'll get to. George Harrison with some amazing guitar solos, even some that are so understated, but so perfect for the songs. And the songwriting is just amazing. Come Together, as I said, perfect way to open. Then that leads into Something, which is one of the most beautiful love songs, you know, funnily enough, written by George Harrison. And Frank Sinatra once said, someone asked him what his favorite Lennon-McCartney song was, and he said Something, which is quite funny.
Well, actually, Francis.
Yeah. So the 2 songs that George Harrison wrote for this album were Something and Here Comes the Sun. I think that he was basically proving a point, saying, you guys aren't giving me enough songs and I'm going to quit the band because this is what I've got, you know? And yeah. I mean,
he was a very good independent artist.
Yeah. And
you know,
the guitar solo on Something is really nice as well, very understated. And then there's a couple songs that I'm not as big on, which kind of, you know, I'm quite strict with my 10s. So it's strong 9. If anything, this is like, if I think an album is better than Abbey Road, it deserves a 10. That's kind of how I judge it, because it's right on the border there. Maxwell Silver Hammer is ridiculous, but I kind of love it. Oh Darling was the song I was talking about, which is a Paul McCartney vocal showcase. Oh my goodness, the vocals on that song are unbelievable. Octopus's Garden is one of Ringo's best songs, really fun.
Yeah. I like the way.
Yeah, I Want You, She's So Heavy. Again, great bass, but the guitar work is so great. It runs a little bit long, but I can forgive it. It's got a cool atmosphere. And then Here Comes the Sun comes at the perfect time in the album to pick the mood back up again after quite a dreary, atmospheric track. Because I've never loved that song, but I love how the vocals sound, even if the song itself doesn't pull me in. And then you get the medley, the suite at the end of the album, which is just to come up with all this. And at this point, it was mainly Paul McCartney. John wasn't really in the studio for most of this album. And it was mainly Paul McCartney composing a lot of this. You Never Give Me Your Money begins the suite, which is, to me, just a magical song, pretty perfect song. And then it's later, a part of that song is reprised later on. Me and Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, and She Came Through the Bathroom Window work in the context of the medley, but they're not ones I seek out on their own. But I can't say that for Golden Slumbers carry that weight in the end, which as a way to close a career, as a final statement, is just perfection. I've counted it as one song for the songs list, those last 3 songs, which may be cheating, but I don't care. They work so well together.
Make the rules. This is your show.
Yeah, it's the perfect cap on their career. The flow of the suite is absolutely undeniable. And yeah, I think the final line of the end, which is, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make, is just spot on, sums it up brilliantly. And then you get the silly little Her Majesty at the end as the hidden track, which I like. It shows that they're not all serious. They've still got a little bit of humor in them. And I don't know why it's not a 10, really. There's just a couple tracks that drag it down just a little bit, but even then, I've just listed off nearly every song and I love most. So Abbey Road is a strong 9. If I was a bit less strict with my 10s, it would be a 10. and it's in my top 50 of all time. I think it's fantastic. Sorry for rambling. I talked about that for a long time.
All right, you've saved me a job because we synced up, baby.
Nice, yeah, nice.
From Metal goes to Abbey Road. I think I agree with the way you've ranked this as like how we've ordered our listening, because it's a very strong end to their career. It's a, like you said, come together. What a way to open the album. It's amazing. I really enjoyed Octopus's Garden, Here Comes the Sun, because in the end, just great to me. They were really very, very strong albums, and you can see why this is such an icon in music. And the album cover as well, it's almost yeah, that's the one. So that album cover is it's almost bigger than the sum of its parts, weirdly, because it's something that is made a legacy not just for the Beatles but for Abbey Road Studios. It's quite remarkable, and it's a landmark. That album made that place a landmark, and you know, how many places can you say that about? It's a fundamental part of British music culture, and it's an important album, and it's important to them as much as it's important to us. And I think it's definitely worthy of being in a middle position. However, it only gets an 8. It is the last 8
Nice.
of my listening, but it's the high end 8. You know, if I was still doing the halves, which I jettisoned very early on, this would be the 8.5. It's a proper job album.
Yeah.
Couldn't decide whether to do that or that, so I did that.
Okay, there's still one more chance to sync up again. So we synced up on the bottom, and we synced up at number 3.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling we might sync up, but I'm not sure, because my number 2 is Revolver.
Right.
The album from 1966, the 7th album. This is a 10. It is in my top 10 albums ever, and it's not even my favorite Beatles album. I think it's perfect, almost to a note. Taxman was a song I remember showing you, a George Harrison song, and kind of novel that they open with a George Harrison song. I think usually, you know, it's sort of Lennon or McCartney that opens the album, but they gave the opener to George. Great guitar riff and bass line, really biting vocal from George Harrison, very sort of aggressive, and I kind of like how much attitude that song has. Then that just leads straight into Eleanor Rigby, which is a classic. Love the string section, amazing storytelling lyrics. Flows into I'm Only Sleeping, which is heavenly. The backing vocals on that are just unbelievable. I mentioned that Love You Too is my favorite of their Indian experiments with the sitar. Really good little song. Here, There and Everywhere is one of the all-time great love songs. I think Paul McCartney nails that song. Yellow Submarine I used to hate, but I've grown to really like it. I think I hated it because the rest of this album is so emotional, and I kind of was like, it doesn't fit with the flow. But it does. It really does. You need that. Like you said, the Ringo songs bring a bit of joy to the album. And there's a lot of sort of sadder songs on this album. This really sort of picks up the mood a little bit. And I think I've mentioned to you before that George's backing vocals on this are hilarious. It's like, we'll live in a yellow submarine. He sounds so tired of it, and he really doesn't want to be there.
It's like foreshadowing for the album that took its name from the song. So it's like, I know what's coming.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's not front loaded at all either, though, because as great as the first half is, you get She Said, which I think is fantastic. Great lyrics on there as well. Inspired. John had a meeting with someone who said while they were high that they knew what it was like to be dead, and John was like, "Well, I'm using that in a song." And then And Your Bird Can Sing is a personal favorite. That guitar part from George Harrison is all-time classic. How did he come up with that? It's just amazing. And then, yeah, again, the bass from Paul, and Paul's backing vocals are just amazing. For No One is just, I mean, I'm just listing all these songs. How are these all on the same album? It's just like amazing. Dr. Robert is often considered the worst song on the album, but I think it's a fun little jam. I Want to Tell You is great. And then Got to Get You Into My Life, just such a great song with those big horns. And then Tomorrow Never Knows, which is so strange and apocalyptic almost and eerie, but it's so ahead of its time. There's pictures of the studio of John Lennon sat upside down recording his vocal for that song. He wanted to hang from a chandelier, but they wouldn't let him. And yeah,
God, red tape, eh?
It is one of my favorite albums of all time. I love it. For almost any discography, it would be the number one, but it's the Beatles, so it's number two. And by this point, they'd stopped touring because they wanted to spend more time in the studio and perfect their songs. And I think that was really a wise decision because, man, oh man, this is a juggernaut of an album, and it's my number two.
Yeah, your zeal for the Beatles is infectious. It really is lovely to hear you be so enthusiastic about it. And I'm really glad that we've done this discography because finally I can understand why they've had such an impact on culture. We haven't synced up because my silver medal goes to Help. Great little bop. I think it's a really strong album. It's got very similar credentials that Hard Day's Night had. It's just a really good, steady listen. I think there's some really outstanding tracks on it. And I really enjoyed listening to Help. I think it was, I mean, if I read off some of the songs that I saved to my playlist, I saved Help, You Gotta Hide Your Love Away. I Need You is a really, really lovely song. Big standout there. Another Girl, You're Gonna Lose That Girl. A Ticket to Ride. It's iconic. It really is. Act Naturally. Ringo. Come on, my man Ringo. He's just really, he's carrying that baton and just be like, hey, I'm the one that has fun. Yeah. And of course, Yesterday is just iconic. It's phenomenal. It's transcended like the Beatles almost. It's like the most covered song in musical history, I think. It's just phenomenal and really moving and important, I think. And this album for me, I know you ranked it at 7, but obviously we're doing the Beatles, so you can't scrutinize where we ranked our albums that heavily. Help is just a really seminal piece of their discography, and I have no hesitation in having that at my silver position.
I love that. You're making me want to listen to it. Yeah, I mean, I thought Help was going to be a bit higher, but I think it was less that I didn't enjoy Help as much as I thought. I enjoyed Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour more than I thought, so they kind of just picked it a little bit. So
took you by surprise.
Yeah, the only really set in stone stuff is the bottom 2 and the top 3 for me, really. Everything else was kind of up for grabs. So,
and that was a 9, by the way. Help was strong.
Great to hear. So, my number 1, and I have a lot to say because there are 30 tracks. It's the White Album. And before anybody says anything, all right, I know it's too long. Everybody knows it's too long. Have some fun. This is one of the most insane albums ever made in terms of how much they switch from style. You've got 3 songwriters, well, 4 if you count Ringo. He writes a couple of these, but 3 main songwriters who are all at the peak of their powers, all just trying something different, with the exception of Revolution 9. There are 29 songs on here, which are all just getting everything that you would want out of that track. And I'm going to list out a lot of them because Back in the USSR as an opener, it's kind of a play on the Beach Boys, California Girls and that kind of stuff. It's like, what if that kind of song was about the USSR? It's just so funny. And I think that's just a perfect way to open. And then again, we talk about the transitions, the way that transitions perfectly into Dear Prudence, which is the most tender, beautiful song. And what I've always loved about that song is how all the instruments come in slowly one by one. It starts off just being John and the guitar, and then Paul's bass comes in, and then George comes in with these lead guitar parts. And from where it starts and where it ends, it's like it's built into this sort of euphoric, amazing moment where everything is all together and they're all playing together, despite all of their, at this point, especially this and the sessions for Get Back, they were just butting heads all the time. But it really doesn't show because they're still playing so brilliantly as a band. And then I think While My Guitar Gently Weeps is one of George's best songs. Really great piano on there, and the guitar solo from Eric Clapton, who came in to do some session work. They're getting some big names for this album. Happiness is a Warm Gun is an absolute classic, multi-part structure, all over the place. It's like 3 different songs put into one, and it's only 3 minutes. I think you can give that song a lot of credit for songs like Bohemian Rhapsody and Paranoid Android by Radiohead, you know, these sort of multi-part, weird structural songs. Martha My Dear is irresistible pop from Paul McCartney, probably went on to inspire Mr. Blue Sky because Jeff Lynne was a massive Beatles fan, and it has a very similar sort of bounce to it, which I love. I'm So Tired is great. Brilliant sarcastic lyrics from John Lennon. The curse Sir Walter Raleigh, he was such a stupid git. Amazing line. And then
Could only be an Englishman. That's
Then you have Blackbird, which is, to me, what completes the greatest 5-track run in music history of While My Guitar Don't Weep, Happiness, Warm Gun, Martha My Dear, I'm So Tired, Blackbird. Those 5 tracks in a row, just you can't get better than that, in my opinion. The double meaning of that song with the social commentary of the civil rights movement, whilst also, you know, you can read it in any way you want, and the guitar part is iconic as well. Great vocals. Rocky Raccoon, a great story song, great harmonica from John, which he sort of did a lot on the early albums and kind of didn't use the harmonica as much by this point, but he just chucks a harmonica on Rocky Raccoon and it's great. And I really easily could have just made a top 20 list just from this album, because I feel I didn't, because I wanted a bit of variety. You know, there's so many great songs, and then ending the first disc with 2 love songs, I Will by Paul McCartney, which is so sweet and uplifting, and Julia by John Lennon, which is so just it just feels a lot darker. And I think that's what makes them work so well as a songwriting duo, and having those 2 back-to-back kind of shows the different approaches to it. I do agree disc 2 is slightly weaker, but that's only because disc 1 is incredible from front to back. But there are still some amazing songs. I love Birthday. I always play that on my birthday. It's a great little song. I think Mother Nature's Son is beautiful. I actually prefer Harry Nilsson's cover of that song, but I love Paul's version as well. Sexy Sadie is great. Oh my God, Helter Skelter basically invented heavy metal, which is kind of insane, because interesting story about that, a song that we both know, I Can See for Miles by The Who, was when that came out, that was lauded as this is the heaviest song that's ever been written. And Paul McCartney listened to it and was disappointed, and he was like, that's not heavy. So he made Helter Skelter.
That's not a knife.
Yeah, it's just insane. Long, Long, Long is fantastic. Great, tender writing by George. Revolution is just amazing. Honey Pie, granny music. Let's move on. It's great. Savoy Truffle is a song George Harrison wrote about Eric Clapton's fondness for chocolate, and it's great. And then, yeah, you do get Revolution 9, which is...
You really do.
I would call it an insane failed experiment, but an interesting historical tidbit. It's way more interesting to talk about than it is to listen to. And yeah, and then it ends with Good Night, sung by Ringo, written by John, which I think John thought about singing this, and he just thought, it's not right. I need Ringo to sing this. This is who should write it. And he wrote it for his son. And to close the album on that is just perfect. And I think I love this album with all my heart. It has its imperfections, but I don't know. I've spent so much time with this album. It's probably in my top 5 of all time. It's right up there. Every time I put it on, it's a great time. It's a wild time, but it's a great time. And, you know, I said during Elliott Smith that Either Or was the best album we cover. This made me think about it. I'm not sure which of the 2 I like more. It's one of those 2. But
I'd rather you said that this is, I can justify this, even though it's not my number 1. I can justify this being more, I can agree.
Yeah, I get what you mean. But yeah, it is just one of the great high points in music history. It shows the Beatles being able to experiment. Like I said, you got Helter Skelter, which is super heavy. And then you got a song like Piggies, which is just this really strange, like George social commentary song. And then you got I Will, which is a tender love song. And then you got Happiness is a Warm Gun, a multi-part rock song, and all this different ground that they cover in one album. It's like a hodgepodge of all the different genres that are going on at the time. I think it's the album that sums up the 60s better than any other album, because it has the drugs, it has the free spirit, it has the melody, it has the pop. It just has everything I could ever want from an album. But it also has Revolution 9, which stops it from being my all-time favorite. But I can overlook that because
it tops this list still, even with that. So
yeah, I mean,
from your end, clearly
29 of the 30 songs are classics, and that's I'm not very good at maths, but yeah.
I can't wait to see how many you do end up having on your 20 songs list.
Well,
that's really interesting.
They have so many good songs, so yeah. I've talked a lot about that album, and I'll let you take the floor with, you know what, you having my number 2 at number 1, I was not expecting this, but it makes me very happy, because to me it's a 10, and that makes me feel really good. So take the floor, Sam.
I couldn't say it any better than you did. I mean, I've listened to it once. You've had a lot more background, you've had a lot more involvement with this album. That's why it's only a 9 for me, because I've only listened to it once. I mean, with another listen, who knows what can happen. But on first listen all the way through the Beatles, wow, Revolver is phenomenal. And I really wasn't expecting it to be anything, really. I had no expectations going in. I didn't say I had bad expectations. I had nothing going in. I was a clean slate. And, it was just phenomenal. Taxman was very good. Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping is a really great track. I think my mum overheard it and was just like, what's that you're listening to? And I was just like, it's the Beatles, Mum. Like, look how edgy I am. It's probably not very accessible to people like my mum. But who knows? Right. But I loved it. Fantastic song. I think it's one of John Lennon's best off the album. I think it's a really, really strong one. Love You Too. Here, There and Everywhere, like you said, great love song. Paul McCartney really does carry it off. He really demonstrates his voice in that song. Yellow Submarine is just iconic. Another one of Ringo just going, yeah, here I am. I'm here to just have fun. But yeah, no, definitely don't like the album it takes its name from. I got She Said, For No One, Dr. Robert. It's all right. I still liked it, but I definitely think it's not the best off the album. I Want to Tell You, Gotta Get You Into My Life. Those are the big ones that I took from that album. But the real juggernauts for me are I'm Only Sleeping, Here, There and Everywhere, and Yellow Submarine. I just think it's a really, really strong album, and I think I've said earlier that I can't remember which album it was that I said is like really good, like demonstration of what the Beatles are. It was Beatles to Set, that was it. That was the one that I said is a good sort of taking all the bits that you think of the Beatles and putting it together. But I actually would say Revolver does a better job of doing that, I think, because you've kind of got this point in time where they're kind of having all of the ideas that they will ever have, and it's kind of all coming together and making this sound, and you're kind of seeing, right, this is where they've been, this is where they're going. I said a similar thing about Talk Towards the Colour of Spring, and I guess I just really like that, just having that spectrum of sounds rather than going, oh no, we're doing the weird stuff, oh no, we're doing the 60s stuff. I really like Revolver because it really shows what the Beatles did. And even though some of their more iconic stuff and the really important stuff is to come, arguably, I think Revolver is up there with one of the most iconic albums ever. I think it's a really, really strong sound. I think that all of them bring their A game with it. I just think it's a really good listen, and I would highly recommend it to everyone, especially people that say the Beatles are overrated. That just get into Revolver and come back to me, and then we will discuss. Let's see where we go from there.
Well, yeah, I think you owe yourself a bit more credit. You did a very good job of summing all that up, especially as a first listen. Yeah, I think over time, I think initially Sgt. Pepper was the one that everyone said that's the best Beatles album for years and years, and then with the age of the internet, I think more people have gravitated towards Abbey Road and Revolver. So I think you're going to be very popular in the comments for that, especially.
Yay!
Maybe not some of your other picks, but
But as long as I can be forgiven for my missteps with Elliott Smith, I will take it.
Yeah. So what a long video that's going to
Oh
be.
my God.
Um,
I'll definitely, I mean, I was about to say our longest video together, but it might be your longest as well, just on the channel.
Maybe. I mean, we'll see how the edit comes out, but yeah, I think if any band deserves it, it's a band like the Beatles.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you got as much out of it as you did. I know how strict you are with the 10s, so a 9 with that kind of review is as best as I could have hoped for. So, especially for an album that I love so dearly. So, yeah, we'll be back with songs, top 20 songs, because we're doing a big boy discography.
You may not remember, everybody, back when we did Depeche Mode, we did a similar thing.
Yeah, and I think
closing
thoughts for me is just yeah, I think they are, like I said, a gateway album for a lot of band for a lot of people, because yeah, they have the pop sensibilities and the really melodic side to them, but they also push the bout out a lot, and they're not afraid to do something weird, which I think is a really good quality, because so many of these songs are very simple, very easy to digest pop songs. Then you get the occasional I don't know, With and You, Without You, and then it sort of opens your mind up a bit because you're hearing it in the context of this more accessible band. So yeah, any other closing thoughts?
No, I couldn't have said it any better than you. I'm just really glad that we've got round to doing the Beatles the last. I feel like they definitely deserved our attention, and I'm really pleased that I've managed to actually listen to their discography and actually speak with authority, or some sort of authority, and say, you know, I've listened to it. I know why they're important. They definitely deserve their place in history. No one should take that away from them. It's them. They did something important with their sound, and they opened up the music industry for so many people that came after them, even if it wasn't a direct influence. Just showing that things can be done differently was what the Beatles did. And especially as time went on, you would forget, I did at least, that I was listening to a band from the 60s, because they really did pave the way for a lot of what came out of the 70s and the 80s. And for the rest of time, the Beatles will be remembered, akin to what Shakespeare did to literature, I would say.
Yeah, and I think especially albums like Revolver and Abbey Road, those ones especially, I think are pretty timeless. I feel like, yeah, Revolver doesn't sound like it came out from the 60s. It sounds like it came from outer space or something. Yeah, but yeah, really, really cool to do this. Thank you very much to anyone who has sat through both of us albums you've heard talked about a million times.
Yeah. Nothing's new with the Beatles anymore.
I hope that we've done them justice. And if you don't know, we're doing Genesis next, which is an even longer discography, which is very daunting because I've only heard one Genesis album. Sam hasn't heard a single one, but you've heard quite a few.
I've heard a lot of their songs, just never on the same album.
So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to get into that. There probably won't be as much emotional attachment on my end because they'll be
all mine, really. Let's face it.
They'll be new to me. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and join us again for the songs video. And yeah, see you soon.